Shop Macy's VIP sale, going on now. Use your coupon or Macy's card and take an extra 30% off the latest fall trends from designers that rarely go on sale. And save 15% off skincare, makeup, fragrances, and more. Plus, shop fall specials for even more great deals on top brands at Macy's. Savings off regular and already reduced prices. Exclusions apply.
Need a little help? O'Reilly Auto Parts can help. Need advice? We've got advice. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Exceptional customer service. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel.
Hi, you're listening to episode 28 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Tilly.
And I'm Ash.
And I'm so glad that you are back from your travels down south, Ash, because I really need some help with this latest quest that I've been working on.
Okay, what's the problem?
Well, here's the scenario. So I was working in the archives the other day, collating the information for the Chosen One project for the wizards, when suddenly a gust of wind blew open the doors, a scroll thumped down onto the desk. I unrolled it carefully. It was a very particularly ancient scroll, and so the edges crumbled under my touch, but eventually I managed to have it flat and could read the language inscribed on it. It was a very, very ancient language, more symbols than lettering. But after checking and comparing it with various translations in our library, I worked out that it was requesting a classification for some kind of deity. So then that got me thinking about how one would classify a god. Because if you think about it...
Wait.
Yeah.
Tilly, why did you start working on a quest that was sent in before we were even employed by the Fellowship of the Trowel? Why have you done that?
Because honestly, at this point, anything is better than trawling through yet more records looking for the heir of the world.
Oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, so it seems simple enough to me what you're saying. You know, you just need to classify the particular god type and then allocate it a personality, and then bingo, you're done.
Well, see, I initially thought it was that straightforward too, but then I automatically thought, of course, of the first fantasy book featuring gods that popped into my head, Small Gods by Terry Pratchett.
Oh, you're such a Kevin. You're such a Kevin.
And in that book, the gods are actually only as strong as their believers. So just to give a little summary of the vague premise, there's one of the biggest religions on the disc, so like on the world, in Discworld, is Omnion, and the great god Om is like the head god of Omnion, and he's like this all-powerful being, and there's millions of people who worship Om and all this kind of thing, and every couple of millennia he comes down to Earth in a reincarnated form to kind of make sure that everyone's still doing the right thing and all this kind of stuff. And usually he's like a massive ox or a big, strong eagle or like something really big and powerful. But this time he comes down and he's only a little tortoise, because it turns out that even though Omnion is the biggest religion in the world, there's only one person who actually believes in Om. And so that belief is what fuels the gods. So therefore he's only as strong as that one belief. So also, and throughout that book, the reason it's called Small Gods is you have lots of little gods, like small gods, which only pop into existence when people actually start believing in them. So also, consequently, if people stop believing in them, which is then the kind of whole premise of the book, because Om's then worried because he's going, oh my God, if this one believer dies or something happens to him, I'm screwed, because then I won't have anyone believing in me anymore and then I'll die as a god. So if we go by that premise, then gods are actually only created once someone believes in them, so once a person creates them, which could technically make gods a man-made object.
Okay, I see. All right, okay. So that can definitely throw a different light on the situation.
Right? Exactly. So yeah, that's what I wanted your help with, because I don't know. It's sort of, I admit, I also thought initially of just gods are people. So we classify them as a particular kind of person or a particular kind of concept. But yeah, maybe there's more different things. So I'm curious. I had a quick look on the sort of different fantasy depictions of kind of gods or goddesses, as we always do, go back to the literature. And I found this really interesting blog on different kinds of religion in various fantasy fiction from a blog called Legends of Windermere. And I'll put the link in the show notes. And according to them, there are a couple of different sorts that are kind of the classics in fantasy fiction. So you've got actual like Jesus Christianity, which they argue is very unimaginative. Yeah, because if you're doing a fantasy universe, well, why would you make it Christian? But anyway, but then you also have existing kind of ancient pantheons, so like Greek and Roman and Norse, like all of those kind of things. And then you have a 2-god system with like one good, one evil. So like that's the sort of classic as well. Then you have gods that are worshipped but never seen, so kind of intangible gods, I guess. You have warring gods, which then, it's the cause of their disagreements and their war, which sort of pushes the plot forward and causes all of the issues usually. You have gods that are actually physically present in the world. And then you have kind of household deities, so like those ones that protect the home, or like hearth gods, or like all those kinds of things. And they sort of vary between all of these different ones. So those are the kind of examples that this blog came up with. But I'm curious, what books do you know that have featured this concept, or like what kinds of examples do you have from these ones?
Good question. I would also say if you ever call a god within their hearing a person, I think they'd be very upset with you.
Probably. That's true.
Like Zeus.
We might have to reassess the like classification system that we use.
Don't say that in front of them. They'll turn you into a tree.
Yeah, it's true.
So, books, fantasy fiction books, I think the first one I would think of is Godkiller by Hannah Kena. Kena?
I'm not sure actually.
Hannah Kena. We'll say Kena. And
that's a cool one name thing, Hannah Kena.
Yeah, it's very good. And she's the Fallen Gods trilogy, where gods basically they physical manifestations of people's belief.
Oh, so kind of like small gods. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, the more people that believe in, the more powerful they are.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of like there's a few different gods within Godkiller, and I'm not going to do any spoilers because there's quite a lot of spoilers, but there's like Skiddy, who's the god of white lies, but they also then bind themselves to a young noble person, and that's kind of what. But then
so they like impersonate that, or like they become that person, or that person becomes them, or is it just like they're
kind of bound to them as if the person is an object, I think. I've only read halfway through the book.
Okay.
I don't know. Which it happens to me quite a lot.
We will report back with more information.
I just get sidetracked, like on a side quest, and then that's me off.
I mean, this whole thing is my side quest at the moment.
Exactly. But yeah, so then the bit that I remember quite vividly was the river. There's a river god in it because the main character is called Kissin, and her family have been killed by gods. It tells you on the blurb, so that's not
a spoiler.
And basically, she's like a paladin-like mercenary who kind of kills gods in a world where
she is the god killer.
Yeah, she is the god killer. So then in the world where like the king of the world called Midrin has, outlawed gods, banned them because they're too powerful, or they can become too powerful. So basically worship is not a thing. And then these gods will manifest because certain almost pagan beliefs still are around. Like you can't stop it. So like the river god, there's an idol that gets dropped into the river, and then she tracks this god to this river, and then has to break the idol in order to kill the god.
But which, in that case, I guess it's more like indeed them being objects in that case.
Yeah, it is an object.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a divine being by people's belief in that object, or a belief in that concept of the god.
Okay. Which,
that's where it comes from.
And that also, that's similar actually to, I'm just thinking it, because that's very similar to in Small Gods, although then you don't have necessarily objects, it's more indeed the belief itself. So you have to break the belief in order to break the god, rather than
so she always says like Kissin tells you the god can come back because people's belief is still there.
Nice.
So if you break the object, it'll get rid of it for a while, but that god, like she's encountered that god a few times and killed it over and over and over again.
I also I'm just thinking of more Terry Pratchett ones, and there's another one called Pyramids, which is about the kingdom of and when you say it out loud, it's the kingdom of Jelly Baby, but it's spelt like DJELI, like it's, BEBI or something. So it's like, so it's when you're reading it, it's one of those classic ones that when you're reading it, you don't really notice. And it's only if you try to say it out loud that you're like, hey.
Oh, it is again.
But that one's kind of inspired by ancient Egypt. So they're building pyramids. And in that one, the pharaoh is like the god, as in the same as with ancient Egypt. But then at some point, and I don't want to spoil it, but basically, it's a similar thing in that the belief of the people have created these gods, even though actually one of the sort of main people made up those gods. But because there's so much belief in them, they are now real. Like it's one of those kind of classic things. So there seem to be a couple of examples of that. Do you know anywhere you have because I'm thinking of the first one I thought of when I thought of this was actually a romance, romantasy called Bound to the Battle God by Ruby Dixon.
So good. It's so good.
Which was just really funny. It was really good because I was basically looking into parallel universe books, and this one's like a parallel universe one. So she gets taken through to this alternative world, and she's
like an anchor, isn't she?
Yeah, well, yeah. So this is a thing, and it's I don't know how much to say without spoiling it because you sort of only really learn a lot of things throughout, but basically there's gods, and every so often they come down to earth and there are physical manifestations of themselves. So they are people. They're not like inhabiting people, or they're not, doing things. So they're actual people walking around, but they're the gods as well. But now they could be killed because they're people, which is quite interesting. So, and I won't say too much else because I think that'll be a spoiler. But yeah, that's an interesting one because then a lot of it is the beginning is, him having to learn that he has to wear clothes and he has to eat and all of this kind of stuff because he's not used to it.
I don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think he talks about it at some point and he's going, but that is disgusting. And they're going, yes, but it's necessary. And
that's I'm sure it's in the Aspect and Anchor series. So that'll give you an idea of maybe where the plots go, because that's actually the series title.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. And you also have another fantasy author who I really like. Is called Tom Holt. I don't know if you heard of him. I'd never heard of him, and I just found one of his books on my parents' bookshelf. And I don't know if he's written anything recently, actually. I need to have a look. But he's written loads and very funny as well. They're comic fantasy. And they're the kind of books that you read and then it's only sort of halfway through you finally get what's happening. You're like, oh, but it's very entertaining the whole way through. So you enjoy reading it and then it's only at some point that you're like, oh, I get it. They're actually in a computer or, something like that. It's sort of this whole thing. And he's written quite a few which are almost sort of parodies of various religious pantheons. So odds and gods, you've got a retirement home for the gods and they're all going around with things. And then there's one called Ye Gods where it's the ancient Greek gods and myths, and Jason is the main character. So he has to do his golden fleece, but he lives in modern suburbia. So he has to kind of work around that, which then they're actual people. The gods are actual
people,
characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's also, I haven't read this series, but I was thinking about it because it's on my TBR, which is extensive and never ending. But the Raven Tower by Anne Leckie, there's the narrator of the book is a god. It's the god of strength and patience of the hill, but the god inhabits a large boulder. It is the boulder.
So the whole story is from the perspective of a boulder? Kind of,
yeah. So it's split into two different perspectives, but one of the narrators is the strength and patience of the hill god. But then the gods only speak the truth. So if they say something that's a lie, they expend energy. But then it means that the world changes because of the lie, and then
So that it's not a lie anymore.
Yeah, so the god has spoken it, so that it's fallible. But then the god, if it expends too much energy, it will die.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're not necessarily immortal.
No.
If they make a mistake.
Only if they lie. Like they're mortal, I suppose.
Which, if that isn't a good message, I don't know what is. Well, which actually, the word immortal just reminds me of another series called the Immortals series, by Tamora Pierce, who was one of my favorite authors ever growing up. I devoured her books when I was a teenager. And I think it's called The Realms of the Gods is the 4th book. And in that one, you actually meet the gods because the MCs venture to the divine realms, which is where the gods live. But that's sort of interesting one because the gods don't actually live in... The gods are people, but they don't live on Earth, so they have their own like little realm.
And do they interfere with Earth? Or they do. Okay.
They do, but I think not kind of. It's not like a whole thing where if they have a battle that affects Earth, it's more like the effects of Earth they'll respond to kind of thing. So they'll respond to actions of people and that kind of thing, and they're kind of. It's almost like a pantheon a little bit. So you have like a father god and a mother god, and then you have different sub-gods with like the gods of the animals, the gods of different water or stone, and all of that kind of thing. So it's sort of more similar to the ancient Greek ones, but less Zeus getting angry. kind of,
into trees
and basically just ruining everything. Yeah. So, and those kind of pop up throughout. But yeah, they're sort of more alluded to, I guess, throughout most of the books. They don't really feature as main characters until the Realms of the Gods. So
also, I would just do a plug for a new series that's come up on Netflix, if anyone, which is all God related, and because we're talking about Zeus, Kaos.
Oh, I've seen that with Jeff
Goldblum.
Jeff Goldblum, yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. He plays a very scary, very realistic Zeus.
Ooh, okay.
And that also ties into belief and how the gods came into being, but I would spoil it, but I would recommend watching it because it does tie into this episode quite well, actually.
Okay. Yeah, I need to try it because I have Netflix again, actually. I didn't have it for ages, and now I have it again. So I will try it.
It's very good. And it has all the 3 main, most popular myths, I think. But I won't say. But yeah.
Okay, interesting. But yeah, so I mean, there's the ones that were sort of mentioned in the blog, but then there's also, I mean, even just in the ones we've had, there's a couple of different possibilities for gods kind of out there, like in person or elusive or representing a people, representing an object, just based on belief. So yeah, there's lots of different possibilities for how we could classify them.
There are. But the majority so far seems to be there's real people that we'll not call real people because they'll get angry at us. But you know what I mean? As they, can physically interact with the world as beings. So then they'd be identified as potentially people within the archaeological record, right?
Yeah, but then what about those situations, like we said as well, where the gods only exist because of the belief of everyday people? Are they still people? Like, are they independent beings in their own right? Or are they man-made creations? And therefore, are they people or are they objects?
Oh, God.
Yeah, exactly. But what type?
No, I mean, like, oh goodness, that's like a
right,
question. Don't mean like that. I think this calls for a cup of tea.
Yes.
So I'll go and I'll put the cauldron on, and we'll be right back.
Shop Macy's VIP sale going on now. Use your coupon or Macy's card and take an extra 30% off the latest fall trends from designers that rarely go on sale. And save 15% off skincare, makeup, fragrances, and more. Plus, shop fall specials for even more great deals on top brands at Macy's. Savings off regular and already reduced prices. Exclusions apply.
Thanks for the tea. It's made me feel a bit calmer about the situation.
Good. Okay, I think it's fine. We can work this out. So, according to the fantasy, there are 3 potential situations here, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
1, gods are independently created by people, or created people, right? Mm-hmm. 2, gods are man-made and therefore could be classified as objects.
Yeah.
Which, I'm sorry, Zeus, I didn't mean that. And then 3, gods are intangible concepts.
Yeah, which is a bit more complicated. Okay, we'll get there.
So all we need to do is think of how we would identify these in the 3 situations archaeologically.
Okay, all right. Okay, yes, I like lists. Okay, I like breaking down tasks this way. Okay, so if we start with the first one, then gods are people. Sorry, Zeus. Zeus, if you're listening, assume we're not talking about you.
Aphrodite, right? and all of them, and Hera. No, she'd be the worst one.
Oh God, yeah. Any gods listening? This is purely hypothetical. We're just podcasters. Okay,
this is a thought experiment rather than anything else. It's not heresy, I swear.
Exactly.
Right. Are you a potted plant now? I'm not. That's good.
I wouldn't know if I was, right? That's the worst part of gods. They sometimes make you into something and then they don't make you don't realize you're something else.
Are we potted plants right now?
Are we potted plants? This would make the recording. I mean, thank goodness I pressed the recording button before it got turned into potted plants. This might just be the longest recording ever because I can't press it off.
I really want art now of us as potted plants.
Yes. That could be our next T Public t-shirt. Yes. Okay. Right. Yes. Serious podcast. Serious archaeology. So if we go for option 1, gods are people, and again, yes, disclaimers to anyone listening. So how would we identify them archaeologically? I mean, I guess if gods are people, then they're just really high status people.
They have to be, because they would be the ones in the big burial mounds, man.
But would they be in burial mounds? This is what I was just thinking. Because they're immortal, so they don't die, unless they've lied, of course.
Well, they lied, or their idol's been. No.
But then it's the idol. Then it's not them.
Object. Yeah. Oh my goodness, this is confusing.
Right? I mean, could they have a burial mound?
Well, I mean, technically, not a burial mound, but gods have temples, right?
That's true. Yeah, temples. And if they're living in like the divine realms or something, then they'd have houses there as well.
And burial mounds sometimes have gods in them, because if you think about it, this is maybe a tangent, but like Maze Howe, which is the Neolithic chambered cairn on Orkney, when the Vikings broke in to evade a storm one night, they thought there was a little gods in it. And they were worried. Yeah, they were worried there was bad spirits. And what is a spirit if not a god? Because that's...
this is something else, I guess we need to... True. I feel I should make some sort of disclaimer here before we go too much further. We're talking about gods. And we're talking about the archaeological representation of kind of God's religion in that respect. But... of course, not all societies in the past, or not all fantastical societies, would have had a belief that involved what we would think of as a god. So I feel like we should just state that now. Don't worry. So, I mean, for example, in archaeology, you have shamanism, which is a very pervasive kind of system of belief that you find all over the place in different parts of the world. But we can't go into all of these different things in one episode because we just don't have the time. So that will be a topic for another episode. But,
it completely will be, yes.
But just to clarify, before we go further, when we're talking about spirits, maybe we should, some spirits can be gods. And some gods can be spirits. But and also some spirits can be part of everything else. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we're also talking about not just monotheism, but polytheism, lots of different gods. We are not taking...
different hierarchies of gods, different all sorts of things. Also, there's a really interesting, I think I have this in the notes later on, but there was a really interesting book that I found when I was looking up stuff for this episode, but I didn't have time to read it all, called The Archaeology of Religion, which if anyone's interested in reading more about that, it's really interesting. It has chapters on the archaeological identification of different world religions, importantly written by archaeologists from those regions. So that's quite important, I think, because then you have to have an understanding of the religious culture, or the context of the culture, before you attempt to identify things. But there's also chapters on the ethics of archaeological approaches to religion and gender in the archaeology of religion. So a very interesting book I would recommend. I'll put the link to it. It's fully up. You can read the whole thing online. So I will put that in the show notes. Anyway, sorry, diverging. Back to gods as people. So mansions and temples, and then burial mounds. So you think, I guess there could be gods, almost like little ghosts living in a burial mound.
It could be. And the manifest, if it's gods are people, we'll stick to the people, because I'm thinking I'm already tangenting off. But yeah, I mean, it totally could be. I mean, if you think about where religion kind of starts as well, usually it's in the kind of ritualistic spaces, right?
Yeah, true.
Like
Yeah.
if you look at the very early bits of Christianity, it starts in graveyards and things like that. So
Yes, that's how you identify it anyway. Like that's how you can see it. Yeah.
yeah.
And actually, there was a really interesting paper I read as well called The Spatial Configuration of Belief by James C. Wright. It's a bit of an older article. It's from like the 90s, but it's still quite interesting because it talks about, so he does different ways that you can interpret Mycenaean that one. Belief. But I like how you started answering with such confidence. You're like, yes, Matilda, it's clearly this. Oh, wait, hang on. Maybe not.
I don't trust my pronunciation. If you say it with confidence, nobody knows.
Mycelian belief. So the different ways you can interpret that belief by looking at the kind of spatial configurations of the different buildings. So like he was looking at whether you could tell that religious activities were like family oriented or wider community oriented, or whether kind of the religion and the gods and that kind of thing were more external to the sort of society and community, or whether they were really associated with the living spaces, which was also quite interesting to see how the people develop, which I guess that's hard to say though, whether then they'd be people, but if the gods were people, then where they'd be living in relation to kind of the town is also important to think about if you understand the religious context.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's 2 points in my head floating around, but like the first is that, I did a course at uni of the archaeology of religion, and we were looking at the Abrahamic religions and how they kind of like started. And a lot of the houses were converted into either kind of temples, or then they were also converted into churches, and you had them living side by side with each other. So people were living there, but then also you'd have like this like holy font in like one of the back rooms and things like that. And so if you're a god, having a house that is your temple, it's also quite a good one. Yeah, but then you also think of like Mount Olympus and then the landscape and things like that. Yeah, that is actually a place in the landscape. So and that is where the gods live.
Yeah. So true. So looking at that kind of thing, and then also looking at like iconography, like pictures. So I'm thinking like the ancient Egyptian wall paintings, which show the gods as like larger than the everyday people. So you can then identify that like, oh, that's a god because that's how they're depicted in kind of that particular type of thing. So okay, so if gods are people, you would expect to see kind of their living spaces, looking at how they're depicted in like the art or that kind of thing, and sort
how
of general
themselves. As well.
Exactly. Yeah, general like signs of high status and kind of power and that kind of thing, and maybe in burial mounds, but that's something we'd have to look at further, I guess.
That sounds like a whole other episode.
Yeah. Okay, so what about option 2 then? That gods are then man-made and maybe objects. How would we identify that?
Immediately when I think of like objects and I think of god figures, I think of like the Venus figurines.
Right?
Yeah. Which have different style variations and typologies depending on where they've come from. Yeah.
And actually, you also have, so I did skim read through this Archaeology of Religion book, and in the one about Archaeology of Hinduism, they mentioned the terracotta figurines, which are apparently very prevalent in prehistoric India. And the mother goddess figure continues to be a really important aspect, like all the way up until like more recent Hindu religion. So like the way that it might have developed differently over time, but it's still that linking thing is the little terracotta objects and sort of the representation of the god.
So the kind of the core of the god remains, but then the different stylistic interpretations change.
Yeah, which would also be an interesting way to see, if you have like evidence of development over time or like cultural variation. Another paper. I went really into the reading with this one. I was really interested in all the background. So there's a paper by Kenneth Limer called Griffins, Myths and Religions. And he looked at the different depictions of griffins, like the mythological creature, in both like historic sources, but also he looked at artistic representations. And I mean, the conclusion was that there was an extremely complex relationship between like griffin imagery and material culture. But the sort of main point he was making that like there's multiple different cultures that shared this similar iconography in terms of sort of recognizable griffins, but that didn't mean that they were a homogenous culture.
Yes,
And the sort of griffins meant something different to each person. So I guess if you're thinking of like a god, it's so dependent on the people it's so dependent on the culture. So even if multiple cultures have the same sort of god, if they're man-made, you would expect to see some variation of that because it's sort of so dependent on the culture of like the social context around the god.
Yeah, and to just like expand that a little bit to outside of objects, you also would see that archaeologically in the place of worship too. So
As well.
You'd see like, I mean, if you look at like, obviously I've been down south, so I think I've got the Neolithic on the brain. But like, like if you look at, you know, any type of standing stone sort of structure, the stones change constantly, and that's usually generational as well. You know, they change it because the representation of what it means to them changes. Yeah, you know, the belief changes.
But that would be more indicative of it being indeed then based on the people rather than the god. Like, as in, because if the god is like an independent being, then they would be like, "Hey, what you doing?"
like excuse me, where's my nice temple gone? Yeah. Why is it now this? I'm so confused. Yeah. That would also be a hilarious book to read if you were just like,
what happened to my temple?
Like, excuse you, why am I suddenly dressed like this? Like, if everything sort of changed constantly and the god changed with it.
Why do I not have two heads?
I'm so confused.
Where's my 8th arm gone?
Why am I in the thong? Lots of different stuff. It would be hilarious. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so yeah, that would be sort of the sort of main difference, I guess, between those two things.
Yeah, so they're not independent beings.
Yeah,
they're dependent on the social context and the opinions around them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so then third option 3, gods are intangible concepts, which I would argue was the most difficult to identify archaeologically.
Absolutely. I could say that word.
Where's the buzzer? We haven't got a buzzer yet. We need to get a buzzer.
Ritual. That's exactly it, though, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. Which, and I've also found a really funny paper called, well, funny. I mean, it was an interesting paper, but I found it quite amusing. It was titled "Are Archaeologists Afraid of Gods?"
Absolutely, I'm terrified of them.
Timothy Insel. But it was really interesting because he talked about all the difference between like religion, ritual, you know, all of that kind of thing. And I have a very quick quote, which is, part of the problem lies with the term religion itself. Archaeologists appear frightened of using it as a descriptive device, and hence recourse is made to ritual, the archaeologist's favorite catch-all category for odd or otherwise not understood behavior, which I thought was just kind of perfect. But then, it's that whole... the word itself has that kind of encapsulation. But going for the sort of odd or otherwise not understood behavior, I think that would be the easiest way almost to identify something ritual, if also potentially a god, like an intangible god.
Yes, like a strange building or one that doesn't have usually ritual is something that doesn't seem to have a function.
Yeah.
Like a practical function.
Yeah.
So
the first thing I thought of was like animal skulls put in the walls, which seems to be like a really common thing in lots of different places. So like in Çatalhöyük you have that. In a place called Kaşia you have that. I think somewhere in Iceland even you had that as well. Like really...
or even like Cladhallen I was thinking of in Uist, which is like these roundhouses, but then they have people that are
anatomically. We should just call this episode Ash and Tilly can't pronounce things.
That's every episode. Anatomically correct people, but they're actually made up of lots of different people, and and they're buried within the threshold of these houses.
Oh, so you'll have someone with like the arm from one person, but the leg from another person, and the skull of someone else. What? But they look like a whole skeleton. Oh, that would be so confusing as an archaeologist.
It's brilliant. It's the most fantastic thing because you'd be like, wait, that person was really strong, but that person's muscle segment. Oh, what?
What?
Like, that would be great. Oh, that's a child's rib, or like something like that. You know.
Oh.
So they have, and I think they're made up of like two or three people.
Okay.
And hundreds of years apart as well. Right. So like that odd to us.
Yes.
To us modern humans, that's strange. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't put anyone on an excavation platform necessarily, not in Western culture anyway.
No,
and that's usually where
we have to,
archaeologists tend to
unfortunately
come from.
Yes.
And so, we we don't understand it, so we go, yeah, that's ritual. If we put the term religion on it because of our modern connotations to defend archaeologists and our fear of gods, it's like, we can't say that because religion has too many connotations for us.
Yeah. And also it's very relevant really only to our modern definitions of religion. Like the term religion itself is pretty new. So
exactly. It has almost a dogma and a structure to it, religion, but we don't actually know if they had that in the past, in prehistory in the past yet.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's that kind of stuff. So there's kind of strange behaviors.
Odd behaviors.
That these strange prehistoric people had, which is not true. They were just doing their thing,
which is different. Yeah.
Or like playing. Is it near Vedbeck? I can't remember. There's another like Mesolithic burial site that has just like loads of heads on spikes, and everyone's like, not why. That's kind of weird.
That's a little creepy.
That's a little bit scary.
I'm glad.
Why though? Back then, maybe that was completely normal. We just don't know.
Yeah.
So that's why we keep it the kind of dissonance between the two. Religion and ritual.
And I guess the problem is also ritual. It doesn't have to necessarily, like we said earlier, relate to a god. So that's kind of the most difficult one to link with a god.
Yeah, because gods could be quite modern too. I suppose it could be the concept of nature or movement or people, or you just don't know.
Okay. But if I need to focus on gods, then maybe especially the first two options, have a look at them, see if I can differentiate there. So all I really need to do is have a look at like old site reports from that time and place, look at the depictions of the gods like over time, and see if I can correlate any of the archaeological evidence there with like one of those, maybe the main two options. Maybe I'll try to sort of avoid the intangible gods option that we've discussed today.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it. Definitely.
Perfect. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Ash, for helping me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. After all, I am a merciful god.
I knew we wouldn't be able to avoid that quote. Well, that's about it for this episode of And My Trowel. We hope that you enjoyed this side quest. If you have any suggestions for topics for future episodes, as always, please do get in contact by email or social media. All of our contact info, as well as all of the references and further reading, plus we've started to add the books that we mentioned. They are found in the show notes. Also, very exciting, we mentioned it briefly, we have merch, people. Merch.
They're real.
I know, right? It's exciting. So you can now order our brand new Fellowship of the Trowel designs on the APN TeePublic store, along with a range of other fun and funky designs from the APN and the different shows on there. So we'll put the link to that in our show notes too. So yeah, have a look at that.
That painting on the wall over there is starting to look a little bit more dilapidated than it was before.
Which painting?
That one there, the portrait of the old and extremely withered man.
Oh, that painting. Huh. Yeah, you're right. Maybe we can get someone in to help us restore it?
Do you know, I think I know just the person.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.